Hi, everyone. Welcome to In the Hot Seat. Look, I know you were expecting several other people, and you will see them shortly. But the reason I'm here, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm Paul Greenberg, one half of the world famous duo of Paul Greenberg and Brent Leary and CRM Players, because today, with the live streamed episode 1 of In the Hot Seat, we're announcing Players Productions Network, PPN. Brent and I created a digital broadcasting network that's focused on influencers that launches today with 5 shows, some of them experimental, and you'll be hearing a lot more about that down the road. Some of it, the shows that have already been established, some of it coming up with unique business and broadcasting models that you probably have never seen. This one, In the Hot Seats, one of our new flagships. And we've got a great show today. If you're interested in seeing more about or learning more about PPN, go to playersproductions.network. Yeah, we actually managed to land the name of the show, the name of the network as a website, playersproductions.network, and take a look. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to your great hosts today, Michael Fauscette and Steve LeMay. Hey,
Thank you,
guys.
Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Really appreciate it and excited to be here and the lead show opening for the network launch. So I think this will be a lot of fun, Steve. This is actually the second episode of the show. I should say that, even though the network hadn't launched when we did the other version of it, and I was actually on the other side of the microphone that time. So, but welcome to episode 2 of In the Hot Seat. It's the first episode of a 5-part series called Experience the Engagement. And the concept really in the hot seat is that every 2 weeks, we'll bring some experts and some customers on for debates, discussion, some discourse as we really try to humanize the digital experience. All the aspects of customer lifecycle are up for discussion, including education, awareness, acquisition, impact, and retention, as well as technologies that are used throughout the whole customer journey from CRM, so sales tech, MarTech, customer service, support tech, logistics, supply chain, and we might even slip in a back office finance person at some point too. So anyway, Stephen, I'm excited to join you today and talk with a very exciting guest. But I'm curious because you're obviously an expert in the opposite end of what I look at. I look at customer experience all the time, and you're really looking at the logistics supply chain piece of it. So what do how do you see that fit into customer experience and kind of how we think about the whole enterprise today?
Well, one of the things related to that, of course, is most people, let's say in 2019, probably didn't think of the supply chain at all. Goods just magically appeared on the shelves at Walmart or on the racks at whatever stores you happen to shop in. Where during COVID, with the supply chain disruptions, I think people suddenly experienced the supply chain, and it wasn't necessarily a good experience. We've talked to a number of people who are deep in the supply chain, who deal with the issues now of customer experience and customer engagement. Clearly, all of the aspects of the customer experience need to come into play, not just talking to customer service, but also what I've always defined as customer service in logistics is very simple. Do you have my stuff? Can I get it?
Can I get it? Yeah, exactly.
Can I get it? And if you don't have my stuff, I don't care how much you smile. You still don't have my stuff.
Yeah, and I think this whole last what, 2.5, whatever it's been now, it doesn't even sort of runs together, I guess, has been a real education in a lot of things. And I know supply chain is one of those things that you have heard a lot about. And I guess too, we've sort of changed a lot of expectations as customers around that. And, I expect my stuff and I expect it to get to me nearly before I order it.
Yes. Did it arrive yesterday? And one of the things about it is what we've seen, and in some research I've been conducting lately, even is, those 4 P's of marketing that are getting pretty crusty in terms of their age still apply. And that is, if there's a problem in the place variable, i.e. the supply chain, then you have to do something about the product, something about the price, and something about the promotion. Mm-hmm. And all of those things affect the customer experience directly. And I think our guest today is someone who can talk to these things in great depth, given the way he approaches his consulting practice. And by the way, similar to what I've done in a lot of my long-term research, and that is first get to know them, then talk to the leadership, then do the report. And of course, Michael, you do the same kinds of things. That is, Michael's research, some of the stuff he writes for his research company might get my colleagues in academia excited. So
nice. I'm glad to be popular somewhere. So, today we have an expert sitting back in the green room. We'll bring him in a minute, but we're going to talk about silos today. And this is one of my sort of favorite hot buttons, I guess, to think about how silos in a business, organizational and system and data, all of those things really have a direct impact on how you deliver an experience and how you can build out a strategy around an experience. And so I'm really excited to introduce our guest, and then we'll bring him on. So described as an experimental CX thought leader and a visionary, Adrian Swinscoe is a best-selling author, Forbes contributor, speaker, investor, advisor, and this is my favorite one, Aspire at CX Punk. I wish I had thought of that. I mean, I want to be a CX Punk. I think that's awesome. And he's been growing and helping develop customer-focused large and small businesses for over 25 years. He has his client list is, the who's who, Sky, Now TV, Apple, ING, KFC, Philips, Cancer Research UK, Talk, Gazprom, Intercontinental Hotel Group, Olympus, HarperCollins, UK Government's Crown Commercial Service, Microsoft, Nespresso, Pearson, and Costa Coffee. He had a couple of coffees in there. That's good. And well, as a bunch of tech vendors and many smaller, medium businesses. Adrian's a frequent writer, podcaster, speaker on all things related to customer service, customer experience. He published a book in 2016 called How to Wow 68 Effortless Ways to Make Every Customer Experience Amazing. Published a genre-busting book, Punk CX, I guess that's how you get the Punk CX title, huh? In 2019, and he has just published a follow-up to that, Punk XL, at the end of 2021. So let's bring on Adrian. Welcome.
Hey, Michael. Hey, Steve. How you doing?
I'm doing just fine, sir. Let me kind of get you started off with a little bit of a story that happened to me just the other day. I was in a colleague's office. He's a department head, and he was fielding a phone call from someone who donated money to the college. It was about these 30-second elevator pitches, and they have a contest for the students, and they put some money up for it. But 3 people were on the phone. One was from marketing, one was from sales, and one was from customer service. And during this phone call that had nothing to do with this, they started arguing over who was in charge of the customer experience. Absolutely nothing to do with the subject of the phone call. So when I guess when you work with companies, what are you seeing inside there?
So it's a bit like for me. So if I can jump in, I feel, I sometimes think in stories or analogies or metaphors or kind of like, kind of whatever word you want to use to describe them. What you've described to me makes me think about, remember those old Roman films that you used to see? You had the chariots and all the horses. Well, the reason that those things work is because you have a frame and they're all lashed to the to the frame and they're all pointing in the same direction. But if you didn't have that frame and they weren't all lashed together, they'd all go off in their own direction, right? And I think that seemed to me that's kind of what happens when you talk about those three people on the call, is that nobody's really kind of clear, or you're not all collectively clear about what it is you want to try and kind of build and how and kind of like why. And I think that's one of the fascinating things I find frequently is, and it's almost a big Achilles heel for companies. I mean, many companies kind of say that, oh, this is really important to us, experience and service and so on and so forth. But then you ask them, you say like, okay, so what is your experience kind of vision and strategy for your company? And then they kind of, what happens is they end up trotting out kind of all of this, it's almost like a buzzword bingo kind of like sentence, which is like omnichannel and AI enabled and kind of seamless and friction free and all that sort of type of stuff. And the thing I find troubling about that sort of stuff is that there's no kind of, it doesn't really tell you where you want to get to and what the experience is going to be like for your customers. And I think that's where I really love stories and about the idea that feels like we end up shortcutting the vision bit. And that leads to a whole bunch of misalignment. I find this with my clients sometimes. They say they want to do these sort of things, and then I turn around to them and say to them, so tell me about the experience that your customer currently has, and then tell me about how you want to kind of change it. What's the experience that you want them to have at some point in the future? And then we can figure out a strategy to get you from A to B. And then after that, you can say, then you start thinking about how do I tie that to the achievement or enablement or support of my kind of business and corporate objectives. Then you can start figuring out how do you couple all those things together to be able to prove ROI. And that's, for me, one of the biggest kind of problems that speaks to this whole kind of alignment sort of thing. People talk about this and that and the other, but I actually think about KPIs and metrics, and I think it goes way before that. You've got to go way upstream and start at the very, very beginning. Think about what the vision and what sort of stories you're telling about the experience that your customers are having right now, and how you want to make that better and what it's going to look like when you're finished.
It's almost like they want to spend time talking about the methods, the how, as it were, and they don't really want to spend much time talking about who and the what and the when, right?
I'm also a bit of a collector of quotes, right? And I love this quote that I used in the kind of recent book, Punk XL. I use kind of like wisdom from other people to make me look smart, go figure. And it was one from Einstein. And he said, there was a quote that said, if you give me an hour to solve a problem, I'll spend 55 minutes thinking about it and then 5 minutes solving it. And I think that's really kind of interesting, because actually, if you think about the way that we do things now, is that we end up getting the ratio the wrong way around. We end up spending about 5 minutes thinking about it and 55 minutes fixing it and solving for it. And I think that's the kind of the thing, is we're almost rushing to the fix, because we almost feel like we need to be demonstrably busy or active. And actually thinking about stuff looks a lot like doing nothing. The problem is like kind of like we actually need to spend a little time to take a bit of a moment to really understand things and to really understand what it means, what is important, what do we can do that's kind of different, because otherwise we end up kind of like just all running around kind of being busy.
Using a little bit of your analogy of the chariot, and also a little of my own background in terms of railroad industry, it seems to me like people would spend 5 minutes saying, okay, well, what we'll do is add another horse to the chariot. Mm-hmm. Which in terms of the transportation and logistics business, railroads for many, many decades thought of themselves as being in the railroad industry, not in the transportation industry.
Sure.
And so, and that means overlooking a lot of competition, just on that basis of, oh, gee, what about trucks? What about what about barges? What about all of these other ways of moving stuff? And by the way, they might replace what you're doing with your trains, but if you're only looking at other trains, you don't notice the competition sneaking up on you. Mm-hmm. It seems to me like that 5-minute solution is add another horse to the chariot. The Romans actually invented a railroad.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing, is that if you don't spend your time thinking about it, you don't get to the kind of point where you can start to really kind of question: is this really the right thing to do? And should we do something completely different? And then, people talk about getting disrupted and stuff. Well, I think a lot of that comes about is because they're focused so hard on the things that they're doing that something comes up to surprise them from behind them, because they haven't actually stepped back to really understand what's going on.
Well, I noticed you mentioned that in Punk XL, and that was the idea that when you ask people, okay, how do you want to create a better customer experience, and everybody raises their hand, and you say, okay, do you want to actually change things to do that? And then all these hands go down.
Well, I mean, I think the focus is really interesting, that we need to back up a step, right, and go, okay, what is it you're really trying to do? What kind of experiences are you thinking about? How do you tie that all together? So I'm curious, though. So if I step back and I build that, how do you work with them then to get that into the culture of the company? Because it seems to me that's sort of, okay, I step back, I know what I want to do, but now I've got to figure out how I tie this together across the whole company and make it work. I mean, how do you work with them? How do you take them from strategy to action?
I think for me, I think it's all relative. Some people just want to be shown the way, and sometimes you have to. And sometimes some people, depending on the size of the organization, you've got to walk with them, and almost the gentle cajoling and nudging and suggestion and everything else. I don't think there's a one size kind of fits all. I've found in my experience, but I do think there's kind of things that you can kind of show people. Like, I'm working with a client right now about doing a big sort of customer experience sort of program, trying to just basically improve the service that they deliver to their customers on a global basis. But we're starting with a kind of a pilot, and then we're going to try to prove the case, and then kind of scale it from there. Now, they did a standard sort of thing where they were building a business case for this, and I'm going to present it to the board and stuff. And I said to the guy who was the program director, I said, the thing I struggle with this is that I don't know where the emotional connection is with all this, because you've got a lot of data in there, and that's going to inform people. But I don't see where the stories are, kind of like that's going to like really kind of like almost move people, because I don't think there's many executives that will say that they don't really care about the company. They want to be proud of the company that they work for. They want to be proud of the quality of the products and the services that they deliver. But sometimes they get so caught up in their stuff, as it were, the customer gets disembodied from that. And I think we need to try and build that in. So when I was speaking to this program director, I said, look, why don't you start the presentation by telling them a few stories about what happens now, and almost to make them feel dissatisfied or uncomfortable with the current status quo, but then position the business case with, like, we're here to try and solve that, and I'll tell you a bit about what we think the outcomes is going to be, what the experience is going to be when we're finished. And I think for me, that was just like, it was a tiny little thing, but it was just like, it was a nudge. And actually what it did do is it just took the business plan and almost like latched it into the psyche and the emotional psyche of the board, where they were like going, we don't like the status quo, and we want what you're proposing. And they sort of got it, not not just from a financial ROI perspective, but also from a personal pride sort of perspective. They wanted to say, yeah, no, that's kind of right. We're making things better for our customers and our people. And that really kind of that really worked. But it wasn't a formulaic thing. It was almost like responding to the situation and to the journey that they were on. And I think that's kind of why I call myself a consultant rather than an advisor. I'm a bit like a horse whisperer sometimes, because you can only kind of change so much, right?
Yeah.
To what extent do you, I understand that your process is you go in and you understand what's going on in the company, then you start talking to the leaders, and then you actually do what most people think of as write the consulting report. And to what extent do you come up with stories that help overcome some of these differences in goals? That is, let's get across the silos. To what extent can the stories help do that?
I think they are that I believe that stories are absolutely essential. I think that I had come up with this sort of 3-layered thing that I say that, data informs people, stories move people, but experiences compel people. And so sometimes you can't do all 3. And ideally, I'd like to do all 3, show them the data, tell them some stories, and then go and help them experience some of the problems that they've faced, because then you start to get real connection to some of the experiences that people are having. But I think that the stories, and then also kind of sharing stories from other places about other things that other people have done that's relevant to what they're doing. So then you get to the kind of point where you're really addressing the social phobia side of things, where people have a fear of being first in many ways. So what you're saying is like, this is not a madcap idea that I'm having. This is something that's been done before, and I'm thinking that you can possibly apply this, customize it for your situation, and then kind of potentially kind of benefit from that. And I think that's important, because actually, to your point, Steve, that you raised from the Punk XL, is like, who wants to be first? Everybody's hand goes up. Who wants to do something different? All the hands come down. You're like, no. Like, people want to be out first. They want to be out front. They want to lead, but they want a tried and tested and proven sort of like kind of thing to follow. Kind of going like, because you know what, people don't explore. They don't go off into the kind of the wilderness to kind of like to make trail and all that type of stuff. They like to follow maps. They like to kind of have a compass, have a bit of guidance, go, it's over there, and that person went there before, and this is what they did, and they're like going, oh, okay, fine, that's great, let's go. And it's like, yeah, there's going to be a bit of discovery, but they also, it takes away that sort of fear of it all, and I think that's part of it. And it's just a lot of it's about momentum. I think a lot of times this is about getting people to talk to each other about and into. I remember talking to CRM vendor last year about a piece of research that they did, and they were talking about the whole siloed sort of stuff, and how some of the statistics they were coming up with were frightening. Like, sales were only using about, or responding to only about 50% of the leads that marketing were generating, and it was because they were just the wrong type of leads, but they weren't talking to each other to figure out or to reduce the waste. And I was looking and going, that's wild. It's wild. How does that stuff go on? Who knows?
I mean, that sort of broken experience, like if I step back and I think about it as a customer, when does it have the biggest impact on me, or when am I the most annoyed with the company? It's almost always when I get caught in that, the IVR trap of, oh no, we don't do that. You need to talk to so-and-so. We need to move here. We need to do this. We need to change that. Or even the lack of the ability to know what conversation they had with me, and then I can come back to it, and then they still know what conversation they had with me, rather than having to start over. So I mean, how do you help companies figure out the silos problem? Because I mean, it's not just a data problem, or not just a system problem, but I mean, it is really organizational, cultural too.
Yeah, right? I think that I'm going to quote an idea from Tom Peters. that I've had the joy and the pleasure and the privilege of speaking to a couple of times on a podcast. And Tom is a great sort of advocate of this idea. Well, just people. He's like people first. And he has this great idea about what he calls lunch. And he says, imagine if you kind of ended up having lunch with a person that you don't know in your organization, maybe every day or every other day, kind of like consistently, kind of like through the working kind of year. The amount of new connections that you would build is just phenomenal. The amount of new things that you would learn and your understanding of an organization would grow kind of exponentially. And because it builds on this idea that we know that it's something that we know, but we also kind of tend to forget because we get so busy, is that actually when we want to get things done in organizations, it's usually done via people that we know and that we trust. And often when we were if you think back to the time when we were in the office, we would possibly just, if we wanted to get something done, it was in a rush, we would probably either pick up the phone to somebody or wander down the corridor, go upstairs, knock on somebody's door and go, hey, Michael, hey, Steve, have you got 5 minutes? I just want to ask you something. And they were like, hey, Adrian, yeah, no problem. Kind of come in. Tell us what's on your mind. And you go off and then and they were like, sure, we got you. And then you'd go away. All right, I'll tell you I'll send you an email just to follow up and that would be fine. Now, I think we've lost a lot of that. Because we get stuck in that whole kind of busyness sort of thing, and it breaks down some of those kind of silos. We can stay in our lane, and we get almost like too shy, or we're told not to kind of to do all this sort of stuff. And so I think, and it's become harder over the last couple of years because many of which we've been working kind of remotely. But the methods are there for us to connect with people, and I think we need to remember is like organizations are made up of people. People trying to do good things to serve and deliver good things to other people. That's it.
It seems to me that without these connections, people make assumptions about the other guy. I.e., if sales and marketing aren't and customer service aren't talking to each other, then they assume what the other guy is saying. This is what this guy is like. This is what this guy believes. This is what this person is like. This is what this person believes. This is how they act, putting them in there. So what are some of the most effective ways you've seen to simply break that down?
Well, I think you've just got to start. I mean, I'm working with another organization right now, and they're about 1,000 kind of people. So they are not an insignificant organization, and I'm working with a group of about 25 of them. They are sort of service ambassadors. We're trying to help. We're trying to develop a culture of service excellence through this ambassador sort of network. And I said to them the other day, and this was based on somebody a story that somebody else kind of told me. And I said, you're 25 people in an organization of about 1,000. Now, hypothetically, if every one of you met one new person that you didn't know kind of every week for kind of 50 weeks, then this network could know the whole organization. And I was like, hypothetically, how powerful would that be? And so we just kind of was like going, it's just maths, right? So and all I'm talking about is like a virtual coffee, like a 15, 20-minute kind of talk. Just to go, hey, how you doing?
My name's Adrian. It's like stepping back and going back to this really fundamental of connecting people to people. And building some kind of a relationship behind the scenes makes everything.
Because actually, let's face it, Michael.
Yeah, that makes sense.
When we talk about experience and engagement, we talk about customer side of stuff, and we know that kind of like actually employee experience and being able to do things well and do things effectively is the foundation of a really great customer experience. But it's all about relationships, right? It's all about how do we connect with people.
It makes a lot of sense to me when I'm thinking about internally, but step back out to the customer for a minute too, because it seems to me that that's another part of the problem. And actually, you even said this when you were talking about the program manager example, that if you look at it from the customer perspective and then figure out how you capture the right sort of feedback and input from the customer into that process so that you're constantly iterating on the experience based on what you know, not what you think you know. Is that something that you do? Or you've seen?
Yeah, but I think there's other things that we do. It's like, so it's a continual frustration of mine is that people kind of survey the heck out of their customers and kind of like, I don't know if you're like me, it's like there's probably like a ton of them go past these windows, and I only kind of like maybe kind of answer the odd or respond to the odd one here or there. It's just like a flood, right? So that's that one, and therefore it's a frustration on the back of it. That people do it, but then they also feel like they chase scores, and then doesn't feel like anything kind of changes on the back of it. So that's kind of one side of things. And I wish they'd close the kind of loop. And I'd rather that they do less surveying and more closing of the loop, rather than doing more surveying and not closing the loop, because more data doesn't necessarily help you. It's actually kind of closing the loop that really helps you. I think
so. It's the interaction. It's the interaction that's important in that, right?
Yeah. But I also think the other thing that's kind of really interesting is the thing I've been working with one organization is the idea is like, so people have these quantitative scores, but they have these qualitative kind of like feedback boxes, and that's kind of like one side of things. That's the formal sort of thing. Then there's this massive kind of like iceberg that just sits over here, which is the unsolicited informal feedback that comes in all over the place. Like, Steve, you'll know this, supply chain sort of like stuff. There's like waves of this stuff. And most organizations don't know what to do with it. Yet we have the technology to suck in that unstructured data to kind of figure out kind of where it's coming from and parse out all the kind of the insights and stuff that comes from it. And it's super valuable.
Well, that really brings up a point related to this, and that is, go back 50 years, and we were all searching for information. We're looking for data. It was hard to get. Now we have lots and lots of data, but converting it into information is a different matter, and actually sharing it inside the organization. And as an academic, I get fond of definitions. I've actually got a paper out there on defining supply chain management that I co-authored, where what we did was criticize most of the definitions of supply chain management and say, as definitions, they're terrible. We got two terms going on here: customer experience and customer engagement. And really two questions. One is, how do you distinguish those two things? And the second question is, if a company shares a definition, if everybody shares a definition of customer experience, does that improve things? So first, what's the difference between the two?
Crumbs. So I don't have a lot of truck with definitions. And the reason why I don't have a lot of truck with kind of definitions is because it can mean so many different things to so many different people. And I think it's a bit of a waste of time, kind of like us all arguing about what it means and what it doesn't mean. Because then we end up getting into the situation, and this is kind of the almost the thing that there was the frustration that was behind the whole punk thing, is that I felt this way for a while, and I still feel this way. The experience space is in danger of getting too preoccupied with itself. And what we end up doing is we end up forgetting what the customer experience, because here's the difference. If I ask you a question, what's the difference between customer experience and the customer's experience? Now, flippantly, which I've written about in the past, it's 4 letters and an apostrophe. If you think about it, it's like, bleh. But actually, the difference is a country mile in many places, because the customers are completely disenfranchised at different bodies and nowhere part of the process. And so I'm actually kind of more interested in not talking about the definitions of those sort of things. Well, I can see there's importance for that to get kind of alignment and all these different sort of things, but it's important to understand what the customer's experience is, not customer experience.
My major point is I don't want people talking past each other. I.e.,
Yeah.
one's talking about this one and one's talking about that one, but they're using the same terminology, for example. But
Steve, if I can come in there,
Sure.
If I go back to what I said right at the very beginning about the vision about it, about if you understand kind of what is your customer experience right now, what do you like about it, what do you not like about it, and how would you like to change it, what would you like it to be kind of in the future, and then you can plot a path how to kind of get there. Then you start to kind of getting convergence and alignment around what the customer's experience, what you want it to be. And I think that's the kind of point. Then you get to the point where you're not talking past people because you're not in this kind of reductive sort of like definitional kind of like conversation, because you're actually, what you're doing is you're putting your focus on kind of people that are the recipients of your products and services, rather than about kind of your particular view or your different types of views of kind of what it is or what it is or what it should or shouldn't be, if that makes sense.
Well, I wonder, because like one of the things, and this has been a bit of a pet peeve, and I guess it is a definitional issue in my mind a little bit anyway, and it's more about getting people on the same page. But a lot of, you saw for a period of time, both in the employee side of the tech world and in the customer side, you saw these systems that came out that were introduced as, oh, this system is for employee engagement or in customer engagement, and I just don't understand. And I guess I always sort of push back on that, because I think we've been using experience here, which I think is the right way to think of it, right? You're going to build an experience and it may create engagement or it may not, but you have no control over that, right? So it always sort of was prickly to me to say, here's a system, it's going to make you have engaged customers. No.
No, because here's the thing, Michael, and this is the truth behind all this sort of like stuff. There's what happens, and then there's what we make it mean. That's it. We have if you think about it, I actually have a slightly heretical kind of view sometimes, so don't kind of like don't hold this against me. I sometimes wish I listen to some of this sort of stuff, and I sometimes wish the whole customer experience kind of conversation would go away, because actually we can't, what a customer experience is. Yes, we can influence it. Yes, we can, we can do our best to try and kind of help them have a positive experience, but we actually ultimately don't have any control over that. We have control, or we only have control over kind of what we do.
Yeah.
And I think that's for me, that's kind of one of the biggest kind of problems in it. And can I just kind of say, because I've been looking at the comments, and Sven's kind of said he's kind of like, he loves the kind of the customer experience versus the customer's experience, and then he's decided that he kind of like, he asked if that's Brian Solis's, and I'm like, no, Sven, that's mine. I just want to get that on the record.
Well, one of the things that occurs to me is a customer could be very engaged, i.e., I'm having a problem and I talk to the customer service rep, and the customer service rep doesn't solve my problem. So then I ask to escalate the problem, and I talk to somebody else and they don't solve the problem, and so on and so on and so on. And I may spend 2 weeks trying to get my problem solved. So I'm engaged, but it's not a good experience.
Yeah, that's true. Engagement doesn't necessarily mean positive. It just means that I'm trying to interact with you, and I'm trying hard to interact with you. Yeah,
which is kind of why one of the kind of reasons that they, when I say to people, they said, the only thing I'm really, really interested in is outcomes. Are you producing better outcomes? And I saw in the chat that somebody was referring to that. Is that the only point really kind of like CX programs is to generate revenue and kind of be profitable and everything else? And I absolutely agree with that, because it's all about outcomes. It's about kind of how do you square the circle, or kind of, you know what I mean. The idea about how do you produce positive customer outcomes positive kind of employee outcomes, but also kind of positive kind of business outcomes at the same time. Because I say, it's like, the thing I'm only really interested in is how do we build, nurture, manage, develop organizations that produce better outcomes for both their customers and their people. And I mean people in the broadest sense, both their employees, their suppliers, their stakeholders, their investors, and then all that, and so on and so forth.
One of the things that gets into this is a customer experience when. That is, if in my first encounter with an organization or with a brand, I have a bad experience, I may never have another encounter with them. If I've had 100 encounters with them and now I have one bad one, I'm probably going to forgive you because I have 100 good ones behind that. But if I start poorly, you may not get a second chance.
Yeah.
And we certainly see this in supply chain.
I think that's right. I mean, it's like that old idea, like, the emotional bank account idea. It's like, and I think a lot of this we lose sight of some of this sort of stuff. It's about trust and reliability and credibility and all these different things. And often we don't do the basics brilliantly because we don't understand that actually, if we did the basics brilliantly, that we showed up like on time, when we said we were going to do so, and just that trusted supplier, that becomes it's like a foundation of credibility and reliability, and that becomes the really strong foundation that you can build this magnificent house on. But if you don't have that, what's the point of trying to build a big house on dodgy foundations? It doesn't make sense. And I think, Steve, you're absolutely spot on. That it's this idea is like we don't really understand what trust means in an operational sense, and we haven't put those things together. We think about trust as brand and things. It's like, no, trust is about what you do and when you do it and how you do it every time. It's not about what you say you're going to do; it's about what you do.
And it's building trust. So the point is, the foundation of that relationship is trust, and so everything you do. And since it's fragile, particularly online, everything you do, that makes sense. So we're getting close to winding up here, but there was one thing that I really wanted to make sure that we talked about, Adrian, before the end, and that is, if you go into a customer that's really struggling with a positive customer experience or building out a strategy around that, I mean, what kind of advice would you give them? Is there a magic bullet, or what is it that you think they should do?
No, I think there is no magic kind of bullet, because sometimes people talk about these things being transformation, kind of like, well, we have to have a transformation program, and I'm a bit like, that's like a big scary thing, right? And it takes a lot of preparation and kind of like a lot of kind of money and investment and all these different sort of like kind of things. And I would say that I think the game is like a game of physics, it's a game of energy and a game of momentum and movement. So I think it's like almost like all the physics and astrophysicists are going to like be kind of pile on in a minute. I think there's probably two fundamental kind of like states in the universe. There's inertia and there's momentum, right? And many organizations are stuck in this inertia kind of like state. And our goal should be to figure out what we need to do to create momentum. And if that is, let's go and figure out kind of like, go talk to our customers, go talk to people that are going to deal with the customers. Let's figure out what some of the bigger, most common kind of like problems kind of are. And let's figure out what's the easiest way we can do to make those better, whether it's better for your kind of people that are dealing with the kind of customers or better for your customers, or both at the same time. And then when you generate momentum, then you can build on that, because otherwise, what's the point of kind of talking about a big thing when we know kind of like big things are hard to get moving? So let's be stealthy, let's be agile, let's be kind of like smart about this sort of like stuff. Let's understand the kind of the problem. Let's get stuck in, and let's generate small wins and do that kind of rolling moss sort of thing, because you got to take people with you. You got to make people successful. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. It's a journey. So get moving and take it, because I think I've seen that a lot in the discussion around digital transformation. Like that just scares the hell out of me. What is a digital transformation, right? But if I start to think about it in steps, then I can see that makes a lot more sense.
Well, and to be fair, the whole kind of we're not actually transforming anything. We're evolving stuff on different gradients. Because it changes forever.
Many years ago, long before we might have talked about the digital revolution, my doctoral dissertation chairman, a guy named Frank Davis Jr., said that there are really only two pieces to an organization. One is marketing, which he was using in a very broad sense of saying this is the part of the organization that builds a relationship with customers and determines from that what the organization can do for that customer for money, and kind of in response to Sven's question. And the other part of the organization is logistics, which comes up with a way to respond to those requirements that are uncovered in the relationship. Your insights have been invaluable. Adrian,
really appreciate it, Adrian. Love having you here, and unfortunately we are running out of time. But I mean, I could easily go another hour with this one. It's an exciting topic, and I feel like I learned something, and I hope our audience learned something out of it. And as the show says, you survived the hot seat. So.
And we surely appreciate it.
Yeah,
thank you, gentlemen. It's been an absolute pleasure. And you know what? I applaud you for everything that you're doing. Kind of like tip my hat to kind of like Paul and Brent for the Players Productions Network and things and all of that. And to everybody who's joined in and all the comments and things, just want to say thank you so much. And if you ever want me to come back and have a rummage around something else again, then I'd be more than happy. I'd be honored, in fact.
Excellent. Thank you, Adrian. Really appreciate it. So just for everybody watching the show, if you think you have what it takes to be in the hot seat, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to try to incorporate you into the show and into these topics. How do we really humanize the digital experience, and how can we make your business better from a very practical, everyday perspective, because these topics are really, really important. And that's the In the Hot Seat episode for today. I really want to thank you for being with us this week. And I'm Michael Fauscette.
And I'm Steve LeMay.
Tune in next time for different faces, different topics, different perspectives as we put somebody else in the hot seat.
Thank you again, Adrian.